Well, welcome back, guys. If you're here, it is because you've made it through the Great Depression and FDR's New Deal programs. And now we're going to ease America slowly into getting involved in World War II. But before we do that, we have to really trace the events that led America from being isolated after World War I and then gradually being involved into entering World War II. So let's get it going here, all right? First things first. I mean, you'd see things like this, right? The whole idea of isolation after World War I was to deal with American problems first. The American First Committee really said, hey, we don't want convoys. We don't want to go to war. We don't want world affairs. We want to really stay at home and deal with our own problems, right? So keep the United States out of war. That was the overall sentiment after World War I. So let's take a quick peek at what happened during World War I that made Americans feel that way. So we were reluctant to really enter World War I in 1914. And as you trace the events like the Lusitania and the Zimmerman telegram, really we did not join until 1917. And within a year's time, that war is over. But during that war, I mean, from 1917 to 1918, 48,000 American soldiers died. 2,900 are still missing, and then 56,000 died of disease. So you're looking at a loss of over 100,000 servicemen in World War I. So you can see the hesitantness of our nation in terms of getting involved in another war, right? American losses were so great, we were reluctant, we were hesitant, we wanted to be isolated, and we weren't going to enter into any conflict. And we really needed to evaluate our foreign policy. So two words really come about at this time period. So after World War I, you might hear these two terms used interchangeably, although they are different: isolation and neutrality. So they're similar foreign policies, but they do have some differences. So let's break those two apart for you, all right? Isolation is a national foreign policy, so that's what Americans were post World War I. You may remember we did not join the League of Nations, right? National foreign policy of remaining apart, staying away from political, economic entanglements with other countries. We don't want to be tied. We don't want to be knotted in with those other nations. Neutrality is a little different in terms of something else is already happening, and America was deliberately not going to take a side in that dispute or in that controversy. So even with the words neutrality, you may see the words non-aligned or non-involved. We're not going to be involved in what those nations are up to and what they're doing. We still want to trade and make money, of course, but we are definitely not going to take sides in any matter. So the only way we can save her, and who are we looking at? We're saving democracy, the American First Committee, and where are all the problems? Over here in Europe. So we're going to stay out, right? Leave those problems across the Atlantic Ocean, okay? So when we go back in our own history, we can look at some precedents set by George Washington. And once again, when you see that word precedent, it's something that was done for the very first time that we do over and over and over again. So Washington was really firm on American neutrality. He still said we should trade and make money, right? So he wasn't a big isolationist, as he was more of a keeping America neutral, right? No permanent alliances. Trade was necessary. So in 1793, Washington issues this proclamation of neutrality. And in that, we would not offer aid during the French Revolution, even though they helped us out during our revolution. And in his farewell address in 1796, he warned our nation to avoid entangling alliances. That is, permanent alliances. Don't tell a country you got their back for life, because you may find yourself in a little trouble. So that's kind of the backdrop or the backstory with Washington. You may remember that may have begun to change in the 1820s with the Monroe Doctrine. And once again, Monroe Doctrine reinforced the idea of neutrality for the rest of the world in the Western Hemisphere. So we really kind of made a statement that Monroe said United States would not interfere in European affairs. And at the same token, those European countries should stay out of American affairs and more firmly stay out of the entire Western Hemisphere, which, of course, is a pretty bold statement, right? If you remember that Monroe Doctrine of 1824, right? So here you have like the entire North America, South America, and over here Africa and Europe. And he's telling these people to stay out of the Western hemisphere, right? You may see the Monroe Doctrine as staying out of Latin America. You may find that in a multiple choice, but really you just have to have that idea of, what the Monroe Doctrine is. And here's kind of another example, right? Here's all the problems, and Monroe's saying, hey, stay out of the Western Hemisphere, right? So what is happening in the 1930s? So we're making our way through the Depression, and we're pretty much not dealing with world affairs, right? Congress will pass a series of Neutrality Acts to keep America from making loans, to keep America out of war. And you absolutely, positively must know these 3 laws if you're going to make it through this time period. So let's get them going. There's 3 of them. First big one is a nice one from Roosevelt, known as cash and carry. And kind of this is my favorite one of all. What he basically said was, we're going to be able to sell goods to any nation we want. If nations are at war, that's fine. They can buy things from us, but they must bring the cash and bring their own boat. Carry it themselves. We'll fill it up. We'll fill up your boat, bring the cash. And if your boat gets blown up by some German submarine, we really don't care because we already got paid, and it's not going to be our boat. So it's not going to be our people that are out there dying. And he really felt that the cash and carry policy would keep us out of war, and it did. Well, in 1940, as Hitler invaded Poland in 1939 and the war gets rolling, well, we kind of felt like maybe we should help the British out. They're our democratic brethren. So what we did was known as the Destroyers for Bases deal. We gave them over 50 military warships that we were not using. Said, here, you guys can use these things. And in return, they're going to give us land rights in British territories, overseas colonies, so we can have more naval bases around the globe. So Britain really couldn't pay the cash anymore, so we took their land and their naval bases as trade almost, right? We give them naval ships, they give us naval bases, right? So Britain gets 50 destroyers, and we get what? 8 naval bases. So the last one is getting really close to the American involvement in that war, and that is 1941, known as the Lend-Lease Act. By 1941, Britain, France are broke, and they just simply can't pay us anymore. So what we began doing was providing military goods to countries whose, and here's how Roosevelt put it, defense was vital for the United States defense. So we weren't helping both sides of the war. We kind of picked a side here, and we were helping, of course, Britain, France, China, and the Soviet Union. And Roosevelt called this something. He referred to America as the arsenal for democracy. We were providing the weapons so that a war could be fought and that we did not have to fight it. Right? So there's the United States sending money, sending weapons, and there's some stats there. You can see how much, right? Sending it to Great Britain. France was already taken over by the Germans at that time, sending money to Russia, sending weapons, so we can help those nations out, right? And when you look at it, I mean, there is America. Wow, our factories were really pumping out these bombers, B-29 super Fortress, right? The bombers, and we're selling these things. We're lending them to Great Britain and our allied powers. So one of the big reasons for the outbreak of war, maybe not the American involvement in that war, was something known as appeasement. And if you're coming into a U.S. history, you should have learned this already in your global studies. But what were Great Britain and France doing? They were basically appeasing Hitler. And what is appeasement? Agreeing to some demands to stay out of war, right? So they agreed to a bunch of bunch of demands to kind of not allow a second world war to happen. And once again, it did anyways, right? Hitler could not be appeased, and the world would learn a costly lesson. Maybe they should have stopped him at his first asking. So if you remember anything about World War I, Germany, they lost the Sudetenland, they lost the Rhineland, the Danzig corridor. And what Hitler began doing was he began taking these little pieces. Each one, Germany, the Rhineland areas annexed by 38 and 39. And once 39 comes, he invades Poland to really start the all-out war. So appeasement was something that Britain and France tried to do to stay out of war, and we ended up in war anyway. So the last straw for us, I mean, the war is going on since 1939. America stayed out, and of course there's an event, famous date. You have to know this if you're a United States citizen, right? December 7th, 1941, Japanese warplanes attacked our naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii on a Sunday morning, surprise attack, sneak attack. Roosevelt referred to this as a date which will live in infamy. And this is what brings America into the war. Now, Roosevelt himself can't declare war, but the next day our Congress declared war on Japan. And of course, Japan was allied with Germany. So now Japan bombed us. So we are now at war with Japan and Germany. So we went from being totally isolated and neutral, and now we are involved. So in 1941, there's kind of a picture of Pearl Harbor, a devastating event in American history. And that single event will directly bring us into World War II. So stay tuned, because there'll be some video action for World War II after this, and make sure you're studying, and see you guys later.